take a look back. We're going to take a look back at where we've come from, what we've accomplished over the last few hundred years, actually. And the question I've been asking myself is, how far back do we go? Well, let's take a shot. I'll give you a hint.
Hey guys, can you place my outfit? This stylish garb was worn by plague doctors in the 17th and 18th century. I am dressed in this outfit because its design tells us a good deal about what was believed regarding the way disease was spread. In particular, this fancy beak-like structure, if properly used, was thought to prevent transmission of infection, but I will come back to that in a bit. The eyes of this bird-like mask are covered with glass, and the whole thing fits tightly to the face. In many ways, it feels like a gas mask. It has only 2 small holes to allow air. In truth, this outfit is most uncomfortable and not conducive to lecturing. So let me change back into the more comfortable attire of a 21st century professor.
Wow, that is so much better. I'll tell you, I was sweating to death in that thing. I give a lot of credit to anybody who could walk around in that thing all day. Now, we'll take a closer look at what that was all about. We're going to take a close look at that beak structure and try to understand why it was that they invented they designed that particular outfit. And like everything else, they had a structure in mind and they had properties that would come from that structure. So we'll pick it up there. Let me get a little more comfortable. We can sit down and see each other face to face, and we'll go from there. Take it.
Hi, that's better. I like sitting down here. We can talk together. I can look you in the face, even though I know this is a virtual look. Nonetheless, so I picked the plague years to serve as an ideal jumping off point for our journey of discovery. We believe that the plagues that swept across Europe between 1350 and the middle of the 19th, almost the end of the 19th century, were a form of bubonic plague. Now, bubonic plague is transmitted by a flea which has living in its guts a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. That flea bites something, they regurgitate that, it's ugly, but they regurgitate that bacterium into the bite, and that then develops into the host and leads to death. Now, of course, at this particular time, the residents of Europe knew nothing about bacteria or how disease was spread. And so what I want you to do is put yourself in their place. I want you to imagine yourself having no understanding of how disease is transmitted, and just imagine what your world's like. So imagine yourself as a resident of Italy in 1350. Now, if you are lucky enough to survive the next couple of years, you will watch as half of your family, your friends, your acquaintances, the people down the street, as half of them die. And they died a really horrible death, and very quickly, a very horrible, quick death. Now, it doesn't matter what your station in life is. You've been brought up to believe that somehow clergy are different than noblemen, are different than you are, but that seems not to be the case at all. Everybody is infected to the same degree. And what happens is your culture begins to reflect this lack of certainty. And your art and your culture begins to reflect this lack of certainty. For example, here is a depiction of the so-called Danse Macabre, which represents the plague playing a flute as a pope, an emperor, a laborer, and a child dance to their graves. In Northern Europe, death was pictured as a hag who came to collect the infected with either a rake or a broom. If the hag gathered the sick with a rake, some will survive as they slip between the rake tines. However, if she uses her broom, all will perish. Still, if you have the means, you could practice an early form of social distancing. In 1665, when the bubonic plague swept across England and decimated much of Cambridge, Isaac Newton retreated to his country home in Woolthorpe. There, over a 2-year period while he was in seclusion, he developed his theories of optics, the calculus, and universal gravitation. Not bad for being. In fact, The word quarantine derives from the Italian word quarantino, which stands for 40-day period. What happened was during the Black Plague, ships would come into harbor in places like Venice, and they wouldn't be allowed to disembark. Instead, they would be turned away unless they carried essential goods. In which case, if they carried essential goods, they were allowed to stay, but they had to station themselves out, anchor themselves, and stay out of the harbor for 40 days for that period quarantino. Now, this period of 40 days must have been established through trial and error, because what happens is from the time you get bitten by a flea to the time you die, it takes 37 days. So 40 days turned out to be this exactly right period of time to hold those ships out at harbor. It wasn't uncommon, in fact, for a ship to come in, and when it finished its quarantine, the entire crew was dead. Still, it's just human to seek the cause of the things that are happening around us. So people were always asking, what is it that causes the plague? It cannot be simply uncontrollable. We want to understand what causes it, and in that way, perhaps we can prevent it. Now, the most common explanation at the time was that the plague was caused by miasma, which is literally foul air. The idea was that rotting organic matter put vapors up into the air and polluted it in a way that led to it to be poisonous, and that inhaling these poisonous vapors these miasma would communicate disease. That is, disease was not spread person to person, it was spread through this foul air. In fact, the disease malaria derives directly from that, mal-air. And it was thought reasonable that malaria was caused by bad air because of its prevalence near swamps. And in swamps, there's lots of rotting organic matter. Hence, it only seemed obvious that bad air caused malaria and also caused other diseases. Now, what was fascinating, though, is there was a way to escape the bad air. You could counteract the bad air by breathing perfumes, sweet-smelling things, herbs, spices, things like that. Which brings us back to the beak on the plague doctor's costume. That beak was stuffed full of perfumes and dried flowers and herbs and spices. The idea being, as you inhaled and brought all of that bad air through the odoriferous things that you had stuffed through there, you would be no longer subject to the effects of miasma. And I'm sure that every single plague doctor out there had their own special recipe, their own special concoction, their own special proprietary blend that they stuffed into their beak. I know I do. I know that I have as my special blend. When I have my beak out here, I keep Diet Coke in my beak. So, here we are. Right up until the 19th century, we think that the general feeling is that disease is spread through bad air, that we have no control over it except to do these things like put on these masks and filter it through perfumes. So, how did we go from there to our current understanding? In a matter of about 60 years. Not even quite 60 years it took us to get through that. And we'll address that in our next short lecture in just a couple days. I'll see you guys then. Bye.